had a visit from a friend recently and really got me thinking as he was asking about why do you believe there's Buddha nature and really what is the meaning of life kind of angst, I would say. For me, it felt that way a little bit. So I was thinking about this and like what is useful for my mind when I have these questions. So I'm just going to share from my own experience and hope it will be helpful for him and maybe for some other people. So what I've learned through practicing Buddhism with reliable teachers is that the mind is a very complex thing. The heart mind is very complex, and it's really, in a sense, because there are things are dependent arising, and dependent arising is actually very complex. There's so many causes and conditions. You can think about that just with how anything is produced. So many causes and conditions, and so many factors. And so I think our mind is like that too. And so when we and then understanding that the mind is complex, it also needs a certain amount of care. And so what I wanted to kind of talk about is like how do we experience things? What are the factors that lead to our experience? So that's mostly our attitude and our previous karma. And even for our previous karma to ripen, it kind of needs conditions too. And a lot of that relates to the attitude. So our attitude that we carry in the present moment, in a particular moment, is actually really crucial. And it actually, because of the way the mind works in a certain way, you can think of like all these flashlights shining into a box. And if you have a mental factor that is like quite negative, it's going to like color the texture of your mind, just like the light in that box will be affected. And so our mind can, and that skews actually even our perception as well as many other aspects. But so how our take on the world is affected by really our attitude and how we work with our mind. So in your own experience, you can see, like when your mind feels kind of neutral, you look at things in one way. When you're in a really bad mood, you look at things another way. And when you're really elated, you look at things in another way. And so that right there gives us a sense that you can look at the same thing and have completely different experiences of it based on your attitude. So then one of the things that was most helpful for me, going back to the initial question, was when I look at the way I was raised in my conditioning, I'd have to say I came out of my teenage years and into my 20s with a lot of idealism. And what I've learned over time is that idealism kind of sends you to pessimism in a certain way, because a mind that's too idealistic is actually not realistic. So you're expecting things to be like this, and reality is like this. So you get disappointed and you're pessimistic. What a better attitude is about things, a more realistic view, is to be optimistic. And so then how, when your mind is depressed, can you be optimistic? Well, that's actually probably pretty hard, but you have to recognize what I do, not just with depression, but with what I say to myself often when I'm having any kind of suffering, and this always seems to help, is that a suffering mind is a deluded mind. And that's really helpful for me when I'm in the midst of it all, and I can't pull myself out of things and see things clearly. At least I can say my mind is deluded and I don't have to really follow everything that I'm thinking or any of that stuff. So finding ways to understanding how the mind works and how our attitude affects it helps us in this kind of optimism, I think, because we can look at our own experience and try to discern where are we being realistic and where aren't we? Where have we set the bar too high? And the other factors that come into this for me in terms of the angst that I might feel in life and like things like that, it comes still from my early conditioning, where for me, what I took refuge in a lot was my friends. And so then as an adult and as life goes on and everything gets more complex, I'm expecting my friends to be like Buddhas or something. And then I mix that in with certain levels of pride and arrogance, really, where I'm judging people, or these things I've had to learn about myself, where I'm looking through a lens sometimes where I'm this and they're that, or whatever it is. And all of those states of mind, pride in particular, which is hard to see in ourselves, those really disconnect us from people. It's really hard to feel connected to someone that you are feeling superior to, or maybe you feel special, or whatever it is. So you have to, and it's not easy to see this about yourself, but it's important to look at this because it blinds you. It blinds you to, and for myself, I think it was a hindrance to developing compassion for other people. And if you can't have compassion for people, you're probably going to be kind of miserable, really, because human beings, sentient beings suffering in samsara, we're chock-a-block full of afflictions. Things aren't going to be, that idealistic mind that I had when I was like 15 or 12 or whatever. The world, unfortunately, with our ignorance, really, that we have, it can't really be that way. But understanding that is powerful, because then you aren't setting yourself up for this like this idealistic mind turning into a pessimistic mind, becoming bitter in life, which is, you can distill that, you can see it in people. So going back to what is it that we have some control over, it really is our attitude. We can work with that. We can't just control our mind and make it do what we want it to do, but we can look at the conditions that we're leading our lives. What are the situations we're putting ourselves in? What are the different factors that are affecting our attitude and things like that? And cultivate a mind that's optimistic. Find reasons to be optimistic. Don't spend your time completely in situations and conditions that only lead you to be unhappy. That's, it's not going to work. So those are things that I thought have helped me with those questions, and maybe they'd be helpful for someone else.